And that's really an intriguing journey to me personally, is like, we have to come to terms with the fact that as consumers, we have created the current paradigm.
We are in Clearwater tonight. I'm Allison Morrow.
Hi, I'm Allison Morrow.
I'm Allison Morrow.
And I've gone to a lot of places.
On St. Pete Beach, Allison Morrow.
And now with my former Force Recon Marine husband, I'm going off-grid-ish.
Hey everybody, so we have a kind of special video today because we recently got to sit down with Dr. Zach Bush.
Yeah, he's a pretty cool guy. In fact, not only is he just a doctor, he really likes tea, and he's a big-time hugger. He loves to give hugs.
He says you should hug 7 times a day.
It's doable. You should give it a shot.
So Dr. Bush, you can find him all over online, but he is a really, really smart doctor who studies all kinds of things. But one of the most fascinating points of interest when you listen to him talk is about the bacteria all around us that we can't see, but are basically a part of our health and wellness, mental health, physical health, and how making choices like we're making with this Airstream to kind of reduce our lives down to just what we need and start taking responsibility for things like our food and being more in touch with nature, how that actually, in his research, has shown that it expands and enhances our lives in so many different ways.
Yeah, what you said, his background, he's like a 3-time board certified in
endocrinology, internal medicine, and metabolism. And he's also part of a movement to help farmers go regenerative with their land so that they can protect that bacteria that he says is so important to our bodies and our health.
It's pretty amazing, like the way he interconnects everything with that, whether it's our food or medicine or even how we treat things. Like one of the things I thought was funny was how he compared cancer to snot. So you guys should definitely check it out. It's
definitely keep watching this video until at least he talks about cancer and snot. Anyway, here's Dr. Zach Bush. We'll see you at the end of the video. We're moving into an Airstream. We're moving off the grid-ish is what we say. We want to start a family homestead. We want to raise our own chickens. We see that as like futuristic in some weird way, but the rest of the world kind of looks at it like it's
almost primitive.
Yeah, like it is.
I would say reintegrating our lifestyles back into nature is going to either, be this experiment that's done in small sectors and will be noted as we disappear in our collapse of biology on the planet and our disappearance, or it will be the solution for our total transition of the way in which we do everything. And it will become that native event. It'll be that event. It will be these next 2 generations deciding it's going to reinvent everything from the chicken in the backyard to the technologies and products that would come out of human ingenuity in the context of nature. And it would make nothing outside of the context of nature. And that's really an intriguing journey to me personally, is like, we have to come to terms with the fact that as consumers, we have created the current paradigm. And so when I think many people out there feel like, I'm just a journalist, or I'm just a 9-to-5 worker, I'm just that and that, I'm not a thought leader, I'm not a politician, I'm not, I'm just trying to figure out how to survive and have a good quality of life and find a great partner and maybe raise some kids or at least some chickens, and that's normal for the world. That's life, the world over. And the intriguing thing is that's where the power lies for transformation. The thought leaders will always respond to the demands of that population. And so if the population as a whole has decided, you know what, love freaking NFL football, it's phenomenal, want to watch that at least 5 nights a week. I love microwave dinners because I never have to chop onions and I never have to, sprinkle the rosemary in my food. I never have to touch any raw ingredients. I just get to zap it in the microwave. I love that. Well, if that's the general attitude, then the thought leaders and the corporations that would come out of them and the regulatory environment that would be produced by such a government will cater entirely to that mindset. The excitement around, I think the first cracks were obviously in this kind of funny social movement of like the hipsters, right? And so like, you know what, big beards are cool. Yeah. This remains one of the most mysterious things in social history to me. Like, in just one short year, we decided that beards are cool. And I've never understood the fashion industry. I have absolutely no claim to understanding it to this day, but I'm intrigued that it's indicative of a shift in mindset. And what came out of the hipster generation, obviously, or the hipster movement, was a message of like, you know what? Screw convenience. I want to do cool. I'm going to start listening to LPs. I'm going to get a record player, and I'm going to have a bunch of vinyl, and I'm going to listen to music just as it was back 100 years ago. And that became a thing. And that was a great kind of first kink. And then, not surprisingly, within a couple years of that, we see tiny homes, and we see off the grid, independent living environments. We see whole generation with the collapse of our real estate industry in 2007 and 8. We see a whole generation having to sell their big houses that they're underwater on, buy a trailer, and literally went and lived on the road for a few years. That became hundreds of thousands of families in the U.S. were homeless for a couple of years, getting through their bankruptcies and everything else that happened during that time. And yet it was a necessary stepping stone to say, we got to rethink all of this. We got to rethink. Unfortunately, our government came along and created a bunch of band-aids financially to palliate that situation, so that those people ended up being able to bail themselves out and get themselves back into another mortgage. That's very unfortunate on the scale of social reform, because had it been left to a natural system, they would have all found themselves into that lifestyle that you guys are now pursuing, which is, you know what, the trailer is great. It's all we need. Let's park that on a little piece of land that we can pick up for $5,000, and let's throw some chickens in the backyard. Let's grow a garden, and let's met out a remote contribution to society through whether it's internet work or just simple production of small materials on our farm. And we can make furniture, and we can mill our wood. We can make all kinds of stuff. We forgot how to make stuff. And we outsource that making of.
I'm curious too, you talk a lot about your gut health as it relates to, what's the right word for it? Yeah, the neurotransmitters that affect our mental health. I wonder too if, in addition to that, like outsourcing our responsibility for our lives has also led to just kind of a dysphoria with feeling like we have meaning and purpose in general. And so is there both like a health aspect to it by taking more control over what you're putting in your body or what is in your environment, but also from like a responsibility standpoint, is there something to be said for feeling like you have more purpose and more meaning, which helps with your mental health anyway when you just start doing things for yourself?
Absolutely. It's so mysterious. I think on one level it's almost hard to fathom that the story of bacteria and fungi and this invisible ecosystem around us would be intimately involved in human thought and consciousness. But that's literally what the science is emerging now, is that you can't have a balanced mental state without the contributions and inputs of this vast ecosystem around us. And it should immediately release any sense of hubris or sense of I'm at the top of the food chain human, to, oh my gosh, I am inseparable from the nature around me, and anything that I would do to that nature will happen in my body. And that reality is super important when we start to look at this collapse of health that we're currently in as a nation or as a planet now. How can 46% of our children have a chronic disease? In the 1960s, only 4% of the entire population had a chronic disease. How can 46% of children, 1 in 2, now have a chronic disease diagnosis? And the answer is, we have done to the environment that which would happen in their bodies. And so this is really the singularity that science is proving out, is it goes beyond we are what we eat, which is an age-old adage now. We are what we breathe. We are what we touch. We are what we actually see. We are what we witness. We are what we perceive. We are just an extension. We're a very complex central processing unit computer chip that runs on a huge peripheral sensory system that's just taking up information from the environment. So how can the CPU chip possibly have a thought of its own? I don't think it can. I don't think the human brain has ever thought of a single thing. It can't. It's not the source of the information. All it can do is move things around. And so it can process information in a new and different fashion, but it's not having the thought.
And I could be wrong on this, but even like in New York, isn't that why they had to have Central Park there? Because there was no connection with nature, and it actually changed the mood levels of people in that city, and they've seen it in other cities. So maybe there is something more to that connection with nature to where it's a mental and physical side of it. And when you have any input or output on that equation, it's going to affect the whole sum of all of its parts.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think, serotonin and dopamine are these two neurotransmitters that are kind of the dominant topic around major depression, for example, or pleasure itself. And so whether you're looking at either extreme of that experience, these chemicals of dopamine or serotonin are bizarrely not made by the human body in the end. They are actually made in the interaction between specific species of bacteria and these enteric endocrine cells that line our intestinal lining. And they make 90% of serotonin and over 50% of the dopamine. And the other 50% of dopamine is not made in the brain either. 40% of your total body of dopamine is made in the kidneys. And so between your gut and your kidneys, you make all the dopamine, and between your gut itself makes all the serotonin. And so the brain, again, is not the source of any of this. It's simply this processing unit. And so now we back up to something like New York City and we say, okay, what is the processing unit of New York City? Okay, it's a bunch of human brains together trying to be ingenious in how to commoditize money so that we don't need to produce anything, we can just make more money. And so that ironic kind of input kind of methodology is, okay, we have a bunch of resources going into New York City, and it's extraordinary. You look at just the fossil fuel demands of New York City just to make the taxis go, let alone fuel the food industry that would fuel the 25 million humans that would then make all this ingenious stuff happen to produce what? Nothing. There's like nothing coming off of New York Island to go get exported, right? Like New York City is this like isolated box that only takes inputs. And so in so many ways, the consumption of our species is epitomized, I think, in New York City. And interestingly, I love New York City. I love being there. I love the mentality there. I love that all the blocks are their own neighborhood still, and you've got your neighborhood little grocery, and you've got real cellular function on some level there, and yet they're not being given the opportunity to really create real stuff. And I think that's leaking the soul out of New York City or any other big municipality, where if we can't produce something that we can really put our hands on and say to our grandchildren, look what I just produced for you.
Right.
If we can't do that, there's a sense of I didn't do enough today.
So it's really not just like, we're using New York City as like an example or exemplar of it, but a city is a city. Anywhere I've ever been,
else.
Yep, it's the same. And so going back to like what you said about the whole kind of primitive, maybe some of that has to do with the connotation of what primitive is. Like when we talk about within the brain, I know for like the stuff, once again, that I teach, you say, someone who is really in touch with their primitive brain, their chances, their level of survival is that much higher. I know I've seen it in law enforcement and military industry. When you are truly in touch with your survival brain, your primitive brain, in the limbic system, your chances of survival are that much better. And you compare that to somebody who spent their whole life, this is what my focus is on. Well, I'm not perceiving or receiving that information from the rest of my environment. So now I miss things like a threat, whether in the wild it would be that big cat, or it'd be my, the bad guy, or in like someone's day-to-day life. Well, if I'm focused in on this while I'm driving, I miss the car that's running through the intersection there, yeah. Right at me.
We are a distracted species for sure, right? And there's something to that primitive lifestyle, if we weren't to call it that. And again, I think that, like to your first question, we're going to find that this is the highest level of human awareness and consciousness, is our opportunity, ability, and gift to interact with the ecosystem at large. And so what you guys are about to achieve as a family is exactly, again, a microcosm that you could find and try to reproduce in any family, which is some sense of connection to nature. I had chickens for many years, and I only stopped having chickens when I was just too heartbroken to keep killing raccoons. Because the raccoons were just tearing apart our chicken coop all the time, live out in the woods of Virginia, and I'm just too heartbroken to kill a raccoon. I think they're the smartest creature that I had come across, maybe dolphins being the only one I get to interact with that are smarter, or sea turtles, but they're up there in the kind of top 3 species, and I just couldn't handle having to fight against that. And I was like, you know what, just let the coons finish off the chickens if that's what needs to happen, because I just can't. Why should I think I should eat the chicken or the chicken's egg and not the raccoon? Like, who am I to say that? So that was my journey into the chicken world. And my brother and my parents and all have chickens on their place still in Virginia, and I love it. And just, it was a personal journey for me where I wish I could still interact with outside on a lot of levels. And it's just, I think some of us will sort that out and maybe develop systems where the raccoons aren't a problem. The hawks were getting our birds too. Like, it was just like, every day it was clear that nature was telling me, you don't have a balanced ecosystem that you've created here, and we're going to fix that. And we are going to make this sucker. We're going to make this thing balanced, whether you like it or not. I don't care how many fences you build or how clever you think you're getting, nature's going to even this sucker out, and we're not supposed to have 30 chickens running around in this 1 acre piece of land. And so it was going to straighten that out for me. And so you guys will find out that every time you go to micromanage nature on your homestead, you will lose. And so the question of the future of homesteading is, what is that going to look like? Because I don't know that we even know yet, but it's there. And if we look at the Hadza tribe or something like that out of Africa, where the last hunter-gatherer tribe on Earth, they live kind of the opposite of what nutritionists and all speak. And I say the same stuff. It's like, oh, you should have lots of variety on your plate, lots of color, lots of it. It's not how the Hadza tribe that has the healthiest gut and immune systems on the planet to this day eat. They simply gorge themselves on a single nutrient for a week at a time. They'll find a honeycomb and they'll literally eat gobs of honey and wax for a week. And yet their microbiome doesn't change at all when we do genomics of the gut. And then they'll kill a couple zebra and they'll eat zebra meat for a whole week, nothing else, and their microbiome doesn't shift. And so the reason why that's true for them is they are a literal extension of their greater ecosystem. Food has a huge effect on our microbiome as Americans because we have no other contact with nature. It's in some ways the only way that we touch nature in a day is through our food. And so by so doing, food has become this ever-present and necessary step towards reconnecting to nature. And if we screw that up, we've lost our last lifeline. So food and nutrition, I believe, is our last lifeline in Western civilization towards an ecosystem that would support our health.
As a journalist, it's become really clear to me that just because you give people information doesn't mean that they immediately care or they want to change their behavior because of it. Information itself, to me, has not always been like a unique selling point. There's something that, I don't know, goes off in the heads of people or the hearts of people who decide at some point they just want to change, and then the information comes and it helps them move on that path. And we're trying with this channel to say not just here's the information, but here's how we're doing it ourselves, in hopes that that encourages other people to see that they can do it too. Do you have any thoughts on that, on just how to encourage other people to start to move down this path?
Totally. Yeah, I was lecturing a lot of data for a lot of years and teaching numbers and statistics around public health collapse and pointing to what our lab has been finding as kind of this root cause thing. Like, I was so excited about the data. And one of the first major breakthroughs we made as a lab was to understand the relationship between gluten sensitivity and the microbiome and how we develop gluten sensitivity. And so I was so excited to share this, and we had found the antidote to gluten sensitivity from the microbiome. So I was like, I can't wait to give this to the gluten sensitive population. And so I showed up at one of the largest consumer symposiums or 4-day seminars for gluten sensitivity in the country, and I had no money at the time and started this small little biotech effort and had all these bottles of all this liquid from fossil soil that I was going to give to these people. And I was just so amazed to be at this point as a physician where I actually knew what piece of nature was missing, and I could give that back and expect health to explode out of these people that had spent decades suffering from gluten sensitivity and not knowing what it was, and then finally found their cause, and now are all coming together, and I could deliver the good news. Over the next 3 days, I almost got stoned. They did not want to hear it. They did not want to hear that there was an antidote to gluten sensitivity or a solution to it. They were gluten sensitive people, and they were owning that identity. I've never gone back. I've never been invited back. I've never been invited to publish in their journal. here's the truth, that how did you get gluten sensitive and the solution to it, and they don't want to know. That was such an eye-opener for me. Wow. That you can never lead with the information. And so what I found out through that journey is I have to lead with my heart and soul. And so you heard me talk today for the first time, and for the first 30 minutes I didn't even show you a slide. I just said, here we are as humans, and here you are as 200 people in the audience, and here I am right now, and let's just get super present. And let's just get super real right now, and we're going to release fear, and we're going to release any sense of preconceived notions as to who we are or why we're here, and we're going to have an experience together over the next hour.
One of the things that you said that I really liked was, because we have this posture of fear about death or whatever else there is, we just are looking for anything or anyone to save us from that.
Yes.
And we have outsourced that responsibility to people that may not be worthy of our trust.
Are certainly not equipped to handle our trust or be due our trust. I would say, there's that classic line of like, ignorance is bliss. Mm-hmm. And it is kind of blissful. Like, if you are a pretty healthy person and you're marching through life and you're like, oh look, that person just got sick. Well, if I ever got sick, I'm just so glad I've got healthcare insurance, and I'm just going to go to the doctor and I'll get diagnosed and treated. It's not until you show up diagnosed and treated with something besides a battlefield wound. The only thing we do well as allopathic medicine docs in my book is battlefield medicine. You get shot, you get hit by a car, you fall down some stairs and break a hip. We're pretty damn good at hurrying up and going and fixing that thing. But in fixing that thing, we never acknowledge that there's a healing process in place. We never acknowledge that there's a complex 70 trillion celled organism that's living in the concert of 14 quadrillion mitochondria and another 1.4 quadrillion bacteria, and all of that is conjuncting an ecosystem of healing of that bone or anything else. So we just leave all of that out, and then we're confused why the person comes back with an infection or something. Oh, well, we didn't look at the big picture. But we do battle medicine well. You show up to a doctor with chronic fatigue, chronic pain, brain fog, autoimmune disease, asthma, allergies, psoriasis, eczema, all of these things, and then to find out suddenly that your doctor, A, doesn't know why you have that thing, and B, has no resources other than Band-Aids pharmaceutically, steroids to suppress your immune system, or some sort of antibiotic to further destroy your organic garden. They don't have the tools, and they don't have any context to understand you as an individual within that greater ecosystem of biology. And instead they keep considering you just like they would a sterile petri dish, because unfortunately 100% of the basic science that we know as doctors was created in a sterile petri dish. We literally don't understand cancer because we never studied in the context of a greater ecosystem. We literally do not understand cardiovascular disease because we keep thinking it's a human cell problem. And so we point to all these fancy cellular pathways in the human biology as to why we think cancer is happening, or why we think it's farce. It's a complete lie from its initial outset, because it's considering the system as a closed loop. It can't be a closed loop. Disease comes out of, ultimately, at its root, a divorce from nature. And once you divorce yourselves from nature, now you're going to behave pretty predictably. We can give you a blood pressure medicine, your blood pressure will go down. You'll still die of cardiovascular disease, and in some cases we're going to increase your risk of cardiovascular disease, but we did lower your blood pressure.
You'll have low blood pressure when you kick the bucket.
We use all of these like symptom control, secondary endpoints to treat, and then when we see that respond appropriately to the drug we just gave, we're like, it's working. And then we're confused why all-cause mortality doesn't change. All of the chemotherapy studies ever done have this big secret that we can change death from cancer in the 3-year study. Fewer women might die less, maybe 15% less will die of breast cancer, whatever it is. But all-cause mortality stays the same, meaning no matter which chemotherapy or surgery combination we did, they all tend to die at the same moment. Well, cancer is a symptom, not a cause. Whenever a cancer patient comes in, they're so focused on the volume of their tumors. Like, well, I got a 2-centimeter tumor here in my liver, I got a 1-centimeter tumor in my lung, and everything else. And my favorite kind of reframing of that is, What if you got the common cold and you walked in and the first thing the doctor said is, we need to weigh your snot. We need to collect all of your snot and figure out how much volume is that and how much that weighs. And then we're going to describe the snot. Well, it's got some green stuff and some yellow stuff, and we got some sort of like clear stuff. You have carcinomatosis snot. And we create some fancy name for it, and now we've characterized your illness as carcinomatous snot. That's exactly what we do with cancer. It's a symptom of an immune system dysfunctioning and a regulatory system of the genome dysfunctioning with a complex ecosystem, and is absolutely a symptom of the decline of a natural decline of an organism as it loses self-identity. That happens around, there's one measurement we use in the clinic all the time called a phase angle. It measures the ability of a cell to transit water across the cell membrane. It's the most basic critical function to life itself, and so we can measure that and we can say, oh, here's optimal health, phase angle of 10 to 12. Here's death at a phase angle of 3.5. And interestingly, cancer always tends to happen around a phase angle of 4.5. And so from 10 to 3.5, you're 1 point away from death when that cancer develops, because it's just a symptom of this steady collapse. So now we go cut out, burn out, radiate, chemotherapize that tumor, and say, we fixed your breast cancer, don't worry, you're in total remission. And then the woman dies a year later.
Before that.
Yeah, and so she just stayed on that same trajectory and died at the same moment. As to whether we cut the tumor out or not is irrelevant, because we didn't fix the trajectory, we simply cut out the symptom.
Okay, so the camera kind of dumped out for the last 5 minutes of the talk we had with him, but one
Still
thing,
a lot of good stuff there, though.
Yeah, good stuff. And one thing that he said that didn't make it in is that the process that we're on with the Airstream is becoming more fully human, which I really like, because I would like to not become less human. That would suck.
Yeah.
And you also liked him talking about his cabin.
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. He was saying how there's a lot of moss and growth and stuff on it, and he said it's funny how it's almost like we build these structures to be like mausoleums that would last longer than we're gonna last. He said he kind of liked the idea that once he returns to the earth, that maybe one day his cabin will as well. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, he says his kids don't necessarily want it or need it, so just let it
go.
Disappear.
Yep.
So I don't think our Airstream will decompose into the soil, but that's okay.
No.
We can hand it down to somebody.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we'll see you next time.
Bye.